everyone. I'm Andy Murray, and I'm acting as DJ for this session, Compare, and it's a bit of a meet the author session. Martin has his lifetime of love for risk management on all things data, and he's put together a book helping us reimagine what risk management is going to look like in a data and AI-enabled world. So this session is a chance to quiz Martin, probe through, and perhaps get into the mindset behind why you wrote the book, what's in it, and what you can learn from it. But before we do that, I'm going to run a poll just to find out who we've got in attendance, and also to find out a bit about your views on the topic. So if I'm able to do it, so far so good. Right, Martin, can you just give me a verbal clue whether I've got that right? Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the Slido code, so 2034401. If you can either just on your phone, just take point your camera at the QR code and it'll take you to that, or if you've already got the Slido app, open up the app and put that code in. It would just really, just for our benefit, be really useful to understand the range of roles, or you don't have to do a job title, you could do a role, but what's your role, what's your job, so that we can get a sense of who we have listening in on this session. So we've got a project professional, thank you very much for that. I think a few more people are typing in. A project risk management lead, brilliant. We'll perhaps be inviting you to share your thoughts too at some point when we sort of get into the future aspect of the book. So we've got a few project managers, an IT project manager. So we'll just run this for a little bit longer. I can see more people typing. So delivery manager as well. So we've got a decent spread from project managers to project professional to risk manager. Thank you very much for that. Okay, you've got one more person just providing some content, and then I'll move on to the next one.
So we've only got 5 from all the attendees in there. So if you can jump in as well. So if everybody can engage with it, we'd be very grateful, because it just gets the conversation going for us, really.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to the next one, Martin, because that's the most boring question we've asked in this set, which is about your job title. But let's find out some opinions and some thoughts. So this one's about, is your organization's risk management more about ticking boxes? So is it just really about following the process and sort of, dare I say it, sort of covering your backside? Or is it generally about avoiding and mitigating risks? So what we're going to do on this one is sort of that 10 to 1. So 10 is that basically it's about tick boxing, and 1 is it's about mitigating risk. Okay, so far people are skewing to the box ticking end of the spectrum, although not by much. So we've sort of just hovering sort of closer to the middle than to the extremes. But it looks like there's more leaning right than leaning left. So okay, so someone's thank you for your honesty, whoever just clicked on number 10. But in your organization, it's entirely about ticking boxes than trying to resolve risks. Okay, so still coming in, so quite an interesting spread. And clearly with risk management, we would rather it be on the left-hand side of this scale. So we do know, I think, Martin, your book backs this up through a lot of the academic papers that you reference, that there is a challenge in the sort of the following the process versus the having the purpose behind the process of mitigating risk. Okay, let's move on, because I think we want to get into the detail of the book. So next question. So is risk management ripe for disruption? So 10 means completely, it'll be fundamentally different, and 1 would be, now let's stick with it as it is. It's AI has no role in improving risk management. Okay, so this one's a bit more skewed to the right than before. A few coming in. Again, thank you for participating. Average score coming in at 7.6. So I think the audience we have here, and we do need to recognise that the fact that you've jumped on this meeting today means that you're sort of self-selecting in some respects. So we may well be preaching to the converted here, but across this group, we're saying that you feel that risk management is ripe for disruption using AI and data analytics, which is great because Martin, you'll like to hear that because fundamentally that's that's what your book is about. So
yeah, that's the provocation, Andy. Yeah.
Yep. So the next one: will data analytics and AI help tweak or transform risk management? So although the last one said it's ripe for improving, this one's saying, is that improvement going to be basically making the same processes and methodology better, or is it going to be throwing away some of that process and methodology we've already been using and replacing it with something entirely different? So is it a tweak or is it a rethink? Where do we sit? Okay, so we've got more of a spread of views on this one, with some feeling that it's a tweak. So basically, as we have it, but just do it better or do it right, and others feeling that it's going to be more transformational. So a rethink of how we currently do it. Okay, thank you for that. Right, let's crack on to, we've only got two more. The next question. So thinking forward, so not too far, just 3 years. So in 2027, will risk management as we know it today, and Martin has kindly, in the book, I think it's about 30 or so pages, provided a précis of what risk management is known today. Will we be writing a very different book in 3 years' time when we do that précis of risk management practice? Okay, so it's interesting. You know, the prior one said, "Are we going to change?" And this one's saying, or could we change? This one is, given that time scale, it's prompting us to think, are we really going to change? So yeah, so some happy faces saying yes, and some sad faces saying no, we're going to carry on doing what we are, and it won't fundamentally be different. Okay, right, last one, and then we're going to get into the meat of the discussion.
So this is the one to come to at the end, see if people's changed their minds, Andy.
Right. Okay. Don't answer this one. Stop. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen. And right, we'll save that one. You see, there you go. We've got that question. So, Martin, I've got a few questions for you. We'll do this as a conversation piece. So, I played a role in helping with this book. So you asked me if I would sort of act as an editor for it, which I gladly did, and I learned huge amounts going through it. But for me, and one of the reasons why I was happy to get involved is some people may know that I'm involved with the Project Data Analytics Task Force that was set up back in 2020 when we were all feeling miserable in lockdown, and we were thinking about what can we do with the extra time that we had. Rather than sitting in our gardens getting a suntan, we decided to try and solve the conundrum of why project management doesn't deliver successful projects time and time again. And we looked at the role that data analytics in particular could apply to improving project management. And we eventually come up with the manifesto for data-driven projects, or as I call it, the How Not to Wing It guide. And there's 6 pledges in the manifesto. And this book really touches on all 6 pledges, but there's 3 in particular that I think it really leans into. And the first one of those is that we use data analytics to bust the myths of how we've codified project management in the past. And this book certainly does that through the sort of the reimagining side. Number 5, the pledge in the manifesto is about we need to reskill for a data and AI enabled world. And number 6 is that we codify data analytics into our management processes. So it's not something we do after the event or on the way through, but when we set out to think about how are we going to do, say, risk management, we set out that data strategy right up front to enable us to have a risk management framework or process that truly works. So I think it's brilliant that we've got 3 of the 6 pledges really sort of brought to life through this book. So thank you for taking all your time to pen it. So my first question to you, Martin, is why did you write it?
So loads of reasons really, Andy. So I get challenged quite a lot. In fact, I get trolled on LinkedIn. So there's some people who are lifelong risk managers, right? They've put a huge amount of effort into it. They've got masters in it. It's their profession. And what I'm trying to do is to say, you know, are the fundamentals going to change? And some people don't like that because it is their profession, right? I'm chipping away at their profession, which is not a good feeling for them, right? But for me, this is just progress, right? So it's like back in the day when you're in the typing pool and typing pools disappeared, this could be another thing that's under threat. So I just wanted to challenge some of that debate, really, and to get people thinking about, so what could this future look like? So I'm not here sort of predicting exactly what the futures look like. I'm just trying to point people in the direction that this is a probable future, right? Is it a certain future? No, but is it a probable future? Through my lens, I think it is. So I want to raise some awareness. What I also wanted to do is to show people this is what the steps on that dance could be. This is what the journey could be. And this is the evidence to back it up. So I put quite a lot of effort into the sort of theory that goes behind it, recognizing that risk is too blunt a word. It's too imprecise. And because it is imprecise, we tend to revert back to process. So it then becomes process focused. So I want to sort of explain to people and take them on the journey that risk management is too blunt a word. So it's to help people on that journey and to show them a path towards it. So that's why I've done it all. So I do hope it's helpful for people. And I've open sourced it as well because, you know, I can make a few grand from writing a book for an author when it gets published and 6 people read it. That's not what I'm about, right? It's not about getting money from a book. What I'm trying to do is to say, right, let's see what this path looks like, and we open source it. I get a lot of people engaging it. We move the dial. So this is my second book. I've done one on next generation PMOs, and there's more in the pipeline. So I want to start to share these views on what all of this looks like in the future.
So Martin, you say you've open sourced the book, and we'll no doubt come back to this at the end, but how can people get hold of a copy of it? So where
so I think Erin's going to post something in chat for you all, so you can get a link to the book. So it'll take you to the book. It is a weighty tome. It's something like 115 megabytes. We can put it in smaller, but some of the images, especially things on the bias wheel in there, just blurs it all out. So it's about 100 and something megabytes. So it's held on Google Storage somewhere, so you can get it through that. So just go to the link which Erin's put in chat. Thank you, Erin. Just put your details in, so you might follow up. You see what you think of it as well, because I put a lot of effort into it. So I'll feed your feedback as well. When I do get feedback, I feed it into the next book that I'm going to write, and as well, I will issue this in due course.
Yeah, I mean, there's a section in the sort of the front end of the book that does explain some of the things you just said in terms of why you've written it, but also about how to use the book, and also in particular, sort of, you know, the hack this book, so it's not seen as a as a static tome, but something that will be, you know, developed and refined over time, as either your predictions have come true or they've not come true. But we'll find out, because you've now got a marker in the ground that we can go back and revisit. Now, my favorite part of the book is on page 13. And it's not, Martin's now going to look at what page 13 is. I haven't told him this, but it's not because page 13 is about luck. And obviously there's a luck element to risk in terms of that uncertainty element to it. But no, page 13 is features me. So it's got one of my quotes in there, which is brilliant. And it's the quote that I use around what is risk management really. Is it sort of, is it part science, which sort of Mervyn King provides a quote on? Is it part art, where Kit Yates talks about the art of decision making rather than the science of decision making? Or my favorite, if anyone here is a Terry Pratchett reader from his Discworld novels and his other novels, he talks about decision making as being wizardry. So there you go. So God, you pulled it up. So yeah, my favorite page of the book. It's because it's obviously quotes me. But let's move on. So a bit of overview for people in terms of the structure of the book. So first of all, you provide the introduction, which is why you wrote it and how to use it, and so on. There's a précis of the current practice, and you said about it being 100 or so megabytes. It is a weighty tome in that part. There's a lots of content sort of running through the history of risk management, the different aspects that we use to help us manage risks. And then importantly, you then sort of move on from that précis and then talk about the issues with the current practice. And it's not just your opinion. You have research and you cite lots of papers, particularly academic papers as well, that have shown the evidence of how we might not really be managing the risk, even though we're applying the risk management tools and techniques on our projects. The purpose of the book is really about that reimagining. So what could risk management look like in the future, but also what is it looking like today? There are some things that you put in there that are currently being done. So it's not necessarily about 2 or 3 or years time or that 2027 timescale that you mentioned at the beginning, but things are being done now by some organizations. And there are some things that are just unresolved. They are so ambiguous in terms of these possible futures. You've left them as sort of open questions with some musings as to where it could go. And one of those is around the future role of risk managers, which I'm sure we'll come on to in our discussion later. But Martin, one of the key themes in the book, and that particularly that reimagining bit, is the concept of, you just mentioned it a moment ago, is the term risk the right term to use, and is managing risk the right approach to help deliver successful projects? And you use the term variance analytics. It's a theme that runs through the book. So just give a sort of the elevator pitch, on what does that variance analytics mean and why is it better than, say, managing risk?
Great question, Andy. So from my perspective, risk management, so I spoke to a senior risk manager, so they were in charge of risk management for a massive organization, all right? And I said, what is your job? I said, well, I'm the risk manager. I said, no, what's your job? Because is it your job to manage risk? No, it's not my job to manage risk. So what is your job? I own the process. It's my job to make sure that the risk management is appropriately implemented. I thought, oh, right, that's interesting. So I covered some of that in the book, all right? So for me, it is what the risk managers are. They're the owners of the process, right? They don't manage the risk because the risks are managed by other people. So the risk manager goes round and says, have you updated your risk register? Have you done your management actions? Is this up to date? Is that up to date? So I could get rid of all of that in 24 hours just by putting it through a workflow. And then the machine comes back to you and says, have you updated your management actions, etc. And then I can put some bells and whistles on that with dashboards and various other things, right? I can start to feed that back to people and say, this is your effectiveness at managing the risk management process, right? So that then questions, do I need a risk manager on 40, 50, 60, 70,000 pounds a year managing that process for me, right? So that's the first provocation. And then I get into the case of, right, so what is risk management? Why does it exist? And for me, it exists because we're trying to minimize the downside and manage and sort of optimize the upside, right? That's what we're trying to do. We see the risk management process of doing that through opportunities and threats. But when I looked at 600 project variation notices from another major client, I found that about 20% of those were connected to risk. There's lots of other project variances come from change control, logistics, people being sick, undiscovered something or other, right? Scope being missed out, all sorts of things. So we're using the risk management process to manage variance, but that variance comes from loads of other sources that we happen to have siloed because we did it 40 years ago when we said risk management sits here, and then we've got change control that sits somewhere else, and we've got issue management that sits somewhere else. We've siloed it because that's the way we designed it to make the problem easier to resolve. We don't need to do it that way anymore because we've got computers.
So in terms of variance then, so if you go back to the definition of risk, it's sort of an uncertain event that should it occur will have an impact on the project's objectives. I think it might be different by different bodies of knowledge, but I think if you looked at PMI, APM and others, it will broadly fall into that sort of description. But as you say, when you looked at that, the drivers of variance, if only 20% of those or that sort of number are driven by uncertainty, isn't the rest of it just poor project management? Are those variances just driven by being weak or not being set up right, or is it really issues management that's there? Are we using risk management to compensate for bad project management, basically?
So some of it depends on the nature of your project, right? So we say that HS2 is a complex project, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the loose term that's used for complex projects. From my perspective, we need to be precise again about what we mean by sort of complex projects. So if I drop the word complex projects and instead I use an ordered system, like building the 70th house on a housing estate,
Mm-hmm.
I built 69 houses before I'm about to build the 70th one. I know what I'm doing. If I mess that house up in terms of schedule or whatever, it's probably because I'm not very good at project management, right?
Yeah.
Because I've built lots of them before. If I'm building that 70th house and then Boris Johnson phones me up and says, it's COVID, you've got to send everybody home, right? I'm now in a complex adaptive system. I can't plan my way out of it. It's not bad project management. It's just I've had an external event that has now impacted my project outside of my control. All right. We can't manage that through a risk management process because it's a complex adaptive system. I don't know what the future is because Boris Johnson's not told me what to do yet. All right.
Yeah. And I guess there's also a case of how thorough are we? Because we could spend, a month adding more and more things that could happen, that may never happen onto that list in terms of an unexpected event that we could never have foreseen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is with these very, very low probability, massive impact events, like a meteoroid hitting your building site, construction site or something, right? So what do we do about managing that, right? And if every single project looks at that and you talk about that in your monthly risk reviews, you're never going to get any work done because that list is going to be humongous, of all these low probability, big impact events.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to move on to other parts of the book. So we've sort of been drifting into this topic anyway, but so the overview, you sort of say the theme running through is this shift from risk management to variance analytics. I'm sure we'll cover that a few times again. But in the sort of the chapter 3, the sort of issues with current practice, let's just pick up a couple of examples. So I'll pick one, my favorite, and then you can pick a favorite. So my favorite in there is the one about risk matrices. It's been a hobby horse of mine for a number of years in terms of how we can use that sort of probability impact matrix. And it has all sorts of issues because we can plot things on there, but what we might be plotting is just a single instance of how that risk could occur rather than all of the instances. And the example I often give is, I'll see on a risk register, therefore, so it pops up on a risk matrix of a supplier could be late. And it's not really defined well enough. Is that 1 day late, 1 week late, a year late, 100 years late? Now, when I pose that question on an individual project or an individual risk register, if I'm doing, say, a review, I get told I'm being silly. But when I probe around it, they say, well, do you know this supplier? Yes. How many times have they been late before for this type of work? And so you start to build a profile. So we actually do know some of those answers. But again, in terms of the distribution of that, is it uniform? Is it got a long tail and so on? Yet we put it on our risk matrix as a single position. And I know things like Monte Carlo can help us resolve that, but it's not that our senior leaders use. They use the matrix and they discuss the matrix and they make decisions on the project on the matrix. So you've got a whole lot of research in there about why it's a more of a concern than a use. And I found that section really useful. Sort of it played back to me all the things that I've struggled with in terms of using probability impact matrices. So that's my favorite bit. What's your favorite bit? When you went through it and you sort of found the evidence you've been seeking that why things don't work.
So this is a cracking video, right? So go and watch this video. There's a link in the book to this video from a chap called Douglas Hubbard. And he wrote a book on this a few years ago. And he's got some great stuff in there. Some really, really great insights. And he makes a fantastic argument about it. So it's about an hour long, something like that. It's well worth watching that video. If this is your field of expertise, just listen to him critiquing it because he brings a lot of really good stuff out. And for me, it's back to the point I keep reinforcing as a provocation, is that risk management is the human process of guessing what's going to go wrong, right? We get lots of people sat around the table and say, what do you think is going to go wrong on this project? And they all say, oh, I think this might go wrong. And they say, is that a medium or is that a high? Oh, it's a medium. And then that sits in the risk register until your next review. And people are filling. In fact, I spoke to somebody this morning and they said to me, Martin, the problem with all this risk stuff is I've had to fill in a risk register for a bid. And they said, can you put 8 risks in there? So I've had to pull out 8 risks. Right? So he says, I went into ChatGPT and said, give me 8 risks on this sort of stuff that might come up. We're just turning the handle on process because the system tells us to do it, not because it's going to increase our probability of a successful outcome, minimize the downside, maximize the upside. So for me, we need to move from all this guessing because we've got loads of data and that data is conditional. So people say to me, there's a risk of weather. I said, no, that's not a risk, it's a certainty, right? The weather is never going to be perfect. It's going to be varied, right? And if your risk is your building site is going to get flooded out, and that risk is severe for your project, then go and build a big top over the top, right? Put a massive tent over the top, or do it in summer, or do this, that, the other. There's ways of getting around it. It's not really a risk. It's an investment choice for you, because weather is certain to change, unless you live somewhere very, very hot, right? So,
Yeah.
And
Then
even then, right, you might get a massive flood at an airport.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, great. So, I mean, one of the other themes that I sort of picked up on as I was reading through the section on the sort of the issues with the current practice is how much knowledge management and lessons are inextricably linked to risk management. And there's a great quote you've got in there from the Meg Hillier, who was the chair of the Public Accounts Committee until the Parliament was dissolved. And it's to utterly fail to learn from mistakes over decades, to spectacularly repeat the same mistakes at huge cost to the taxpayer and at huge cost to confidence in our defence capabilities is completely unacceptable. We see too often these mistakes are repeated. So clearly here, we talk about mistakes and things happening, but we often relate that to a risk management or managing risk, but Meg's really saying it's not sort of a risk management issue, it's a knowledge management issue, it's a lessons learned issue. So yeah, that was fascinating for me, that you can't really talk about risk without talking about knowledge management or lessons, really.
So I think for me, so this is what started me off back in 2017. And if you look at the APM, you'll find some stuff. So I went round and talked at various branch events and I wrote papers on it 2018 saying that the lessons learned process is broken. Mm-hmm. And that's what got me on my journey, because what we do with all of this complexity in a project, we boil it up to a line on a spreadsheet that says, don't do this thing. So if you think about a risk either comes off or it doesn't, right? So it turns into an issue. If it turns into an issue, what are you going to do next time round so you can manage it better and it's not going to blow up your project, right? So that's basically what we're trying to do. But knowledge management sits over here in the knowledge management department of a big project, and risk management sits over here with the risk managers, and never the twain shall meet, right? But it's just a loop. It's a feedback loop, right? It's an OODA loop. It's just reinforcing itself all the time. But we don't take that data and we don't feed back to reinforce it. And there's no reason for that. And it's not just a lesson, right? It's not the lesson is instead of having, I mean, I should have put more people in at the start of the project. What does that mean? I've seen lessons that says that I didn't have enough resource at the start of a project. What does that mean? How do I do that next time around? Do I have 10 more people than what somebody's sort of said to me to have? I need the baseline numbers, right? I need the numbers. I need to understand the scale of your project so I can then put some sort of factors around it and maybe factorize it and say, well, my project's actually 50% bigger than that anyway, so I need 50% bigger. Plus, what you're advising me is I need 10% on that as well. So I've now got some metrics. So it's linking back to the actual status of that data ecosystem that I was working in, the number of people, the scope of the project, whatever. I can use machine learning. Those becomes features as part of the machine learning model. I can use those now to factorize and to give a better estimate for what I need. So the lesson learned is not that I need more people. is the lessons learned is that at this stage of a project with this conditionality, this is what I should be doing so I can get better at estimating.
Or it's you need the right number of people. It's then determining what that right number is. Yeah.
Spot
on.
On.
And that's a feature as well, because again, when going through that trace of current practice and some of the issues, risk management tends to sort of end up being personal in terms of what have I experienced or what are my lessons. But the power of it is at the portfolio level. So let's say a risk materializes on my project. Now, one of the questions could ask is, are there other projects in my portfolio that are now susceptible to this same risk at this time frame? So if it's a classic case would be a performance of a particular supplier. Now, if that supplier is being used on 10 other projects, it should immediately trigger some sort of intervention on those other projects, and we perhaps don't have that linkage in place. It'll come as a surprise to the other projects when supplier also performs badly to them. Right, let's move on, because I know there's lots of fantastic content in the book, and we're barely at sort of not even halfway point in the page count. So the section on opportunities. So what can we do if we apply data analytics, AI to the realm of risk management? So I'll pick out a favorite one, and then I'll give you a chance to do the same. So my favorite one in this section, Martin, it's actually fairly early on in it as well, which is the ensemble forecasting, and sort of comes from that sort of chaos theory. You mentioned the weather before. We sort of can predict the weather, not necessarily all the way out, but we have an ability to predict it in the round, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But it's not done by any single forecasting model. It's by multiple models or multiple sensors or multiple inputs done in often in a collaborative basis across different types of organizations. And it's, I guess, at one element, it's just a massive degree of sense making in terms of, is this right? And then the other aspect of it is that our forecast of weather these days isn't about it's definitely going to rain, but we get a probability of rain, don't we? And a probability of rain within a particular window. And as weather forecasting has improved through the ensemble approach, the fidelity of those forecasts have improved as well. So we now get a probability of it raining within an hour window, whereas perhaps it might have been within a day or 2 days or 3 days. We might have rain towards the end of the week, and more localized as well. So that was my favorite bit, thinking about how we could apply sort of the world of weather to other aspects of project risk. So what about you? What's your favorite?
So it's the thing for me, it's this jigsaw lid, right? So for me, if we look at where we want risk management to be in the future, I can't leave it to a software vendor to go and solve that problem for me, because they're probably going to solve part of it, but it's an integrated ecosystem. So if we leave it to a software vendor, we're going to take in a linear route that they're going to plan out for us. This is a community issue. We'll never have enough data inside of one organization to solve this. So we've got to start to pool our data to work out what we can do to train the models so we can predict these things that are going to go wrong, and work out through scenario generation what the likely futures are. And then as we go down that path, those likely futures become narrower and narrower and narrower, and you get a probability distribution about what the potential future is going to be, right? So it's all about sort of engineering that. But we can't do that unless we've got a jigsaw lid, right? Where do we want to be? So in the book, I have got the jigsaw lid that we've published in there, and I've said these are all the modules of capability that we want to deliver. So just imagine that we collaborate to deliver those jigsaw pieces as a profession, and we open source the lot. Now, people say to me, well, that's mad. So what I'm doing through the apprenticeship scheme, working with the organisations such as the Ministry of Defence, is to say, if you put your apprentices onto the apprenticeship scheme, we can work with them as part of the apprenticeship course. They've got to do some projects for their portfolio that gets assessed at the end. If they can work on some of these jigsaw pieces, then we can co-create that future as a free byproduct of a free course, right? So that's when we really start to make a difference at scale. And if we get hundreds of apprentices, if not thousands of apprentices, that is thousands of these little Lego pieces, which enables us to unlock this future. So it's the power of community, the power of collaboration, underpinned by a non-profit data trust that works in the interests of the collective. And this is not about sharing data, this is about pooling data. So it's layering it up so we can start to unlock this future. And I think that's when it gets massively exciting, because we're all involved in it. Yeah, we're all involved in shaping it. And I think
I think it's really interesting. That sort of community, the power of the community is really interesting. I was reading Hannah Fry's book about the role of data and analytics in a sort of versus the human. And she wrote it quite a few years ago, before it was around the time of the 2016 election with Cambridge Analytica and all sorts of what's going on there. But it's interesting how much of it she's got right in that book. But in there she talks about the power of it's a bit like the ensemble forecasting, but the power of the community. And if you look at the stats from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the game show, where you've got the option of asking the audience to choose one of the 4 questions, or you can ask phone a friend, which if you, depending upon your friend network, you're sort of phoning the best person you know for that topic, so the best expert you know. And the success rate of the Ask the Audience, which is random people turning up to a game show, is something like 91%. They get the answer right, and the best person you know, the success rate there is about 60%. So clearly the power of the many is outperforming the power of the individual, and I think that's a great example of why pooling our approaches on something like this can really work. So you talked about the jigsaw lid then, but also in that section about reimagining how it might work, you pick out some examples of things that are happening right now, things that sort of starting to happen, and then you get that crystal ball out and you say, like, let's wind it forward a bit further. What could really happen in a few years' time? You talk about that as Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. So can you just walk us through that? What do those 3 horizons look like?
So Horizon 1 is saying, let's take what we've got today and make it better, right? So at the moment, people take their risk registers and they put it into a heat map. And that might be inside of Excel. So what you can do, you could polish that and put it into Power BI, or you put it into something called a model-driven app. And you make it look prettier. So you can put lots of polish on the top. What I can do as well, I can show trend lines on there. I can show which people are really good at managing those risks, which people aren't, etc. So I can go deeper and deeper and deeper into making the existing processes better, right? So that's what I'm calling ladder 1. So if you can invest loads of money into that, you're going to move yourself up that ladder. There is a second ladder, which is about reimagining it and saying the provocation that risk management is going to die and it's going to get replaced by variance analytics. If you're going to go down that ladder, or up the ladder, sorry, you wouldn't invest, because it's going to be nugatory investment, you wouldn't invest that into ladder 1, you'd put your investment into ladder 2. So this is not a linear process of going from refine to reimagine. Just imagine it's a load of chips on a craps table where you're trying to make your bets, right? You're trying to put your bets on. Where do you want to invest your money? Is it polishing today, or is it starting to invest in reimagining the future? And for me, the biggest return on that investment has got to be reimagining, moving towards a variance analytics approach, because it is about anticipating the future through all the data science that exists for weather forecasting and everything else. We use it for the NHS forecasting number of patients, things like that. We use it in lots of other industries. So why don't we use it in project delivery? And there's things, for instance, so I was talking to somebody yesterday. I went to the PMO conference yesterday. We talked about hospital beds, right? So in a hospital, there's a number of beds, number of doctors, number of patients. Some of those patients are bed blockers because they can't get into a nursing home, etc. Right? That is a multi-factor optimization problem. We have those all the time in project delivery. Why don't we use the algorithm that they use for bed blockers and stick it into our project so we can manage resources and capacity and engineering constraints, whatever? We don't do it because we don't do it. It's not because we can't do it. It's just because we don't do it. Right? There is no reason for not doing it. The algorithms exist. They're free. You can pull them down from a Python library and go and do it.
Haven't had that vision to apply or make that analogy to the bed blocker to the project blocker. and how can we
So it's about upskilling people so they can understand the art of the possible, and then they've got a bit of knowledge where they can go and deploy it, and they get better and better and better at doing those things.
So in terms of that Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, you say they're not necessarily linear in terms of we have to do all of Horizon 1 before moving to 2 and 3. And for some organizations, piling in terms of investing into Horizon 3 and betting on some of those is could well yield a far greater impact for them. And others, actually, the refining might work because of the nature of the projects that they work on. And I guess that to the point you make about the two ladders, and that's in the sort of the further discussion chapter, which is that it's a bit like I'm showing my age now, but I guess it's a bit like VHS versus CD-ROM in terms of there's only so much more optimizing you could do on a VHS tape before you run out of capacity to store things on it, which we used to do. In the olden days when our computers, that's what we used, tapes. But then we went to CD-ROMs, and then we went to others. But each one gave you more potential headroom through further optimization, which the other one was already limited to. So organizations switched to the second or the third early and then started to get the benefit from that. Right, the last chapter then, before the sort of the weighty annexes as well, that you've got points for discussion. So these, as I mentioned right at the beginning, these are the areas that are a little bit ambiguous. We sort of don't know what the futures are. There are multiple futures that exist, and we sort of, we're watching as to whether it's going to sort of head towards future 1 or future 2, and that might change how we approach things today. But in there, there's a number of things that you signpost in there. But one is that should we ban the use of the word risk? I think is one of your points of further discussion. So I guess that's just replacing it by language that's a bit more precise, because risk is quite it's a term that means different things to different people, and it's quite a sloppy term actually, isn't it? Risk.
Yeah. So it's too clumsy. I think it's not precise enough. So if we think about minimizing the downside, and maximizing the upside, and you start to think about change control, if there's a change coming on your project, is that a risk? There is a risk. There's a risk that someone's going to change something, but we've got a process to manage that. So should the risk management process be managing change? And I'd argue no, because we've already got a process to manage it. All right. Mm-hmm. So instead of seeing this through a risk lens, we just see it through all these potential sources of variance. How do we track all those potential sources of variance and head them off? Or some of them might be a positive feedback loop, so you want to go and amplify it. And if you can preempt some of that, so if you know that your change comes in late with a certain client, if you can reflect back from the past 10 projects that when they come in late with a change, it costs them 10 times more of making that change than if they'd have let you know earlier. If you can educate the client on it, then they'll come back and say, I didn't realize all of that. Mm-hmm. So I can do this and I can help you out. So that is not risk management. That's just good practice, right?
Yeah.
So for me, if we're more precise about it, about what we're trying to do, it drives the right behavior and it drives the right analytical approach. And we're not doing that today. We're certainly not doing that today. So I think that precision plays into this variance analyst type role. And that variance analyst cuts across all of your functional silos that exist in project delivery today. And they're just tracking for you where there's potential turbulence is going to come from and what you're going to do about it. And some of it you can't mitigate, right? You're just going to take it on the chin.
I think we just got a little insight into your future thinking there. So you talk about the variance analytics role. So with that sort of discussion point about should we ban the term risk, you're already saying, well, that's going to have an influence on the type of roles we're going to see. So one of the points of further discussion in the book is about the role of the risk manager. And sort of two potential futures. There's multiple out there, but two of them. One could be where the risk manager is replaced by, say, an agent, a chatbot type agent, and the project manager, the generalist, is now using multiple agents to make sense of their project. And they would use a risk agent, they might use a planning agent, they might use a change agent, whatever it would be to help them with their project sense making and decision making. The other one is it's the project manager that gets replaced by agents, and the agents is then drawing on specialists such as risk managers to help them. So there's sort of two possible futures, and perhaps we'll finish in a moment and invite sort of opinions from the attendees as to where it might go. But you do make some other points about the future role of risk managers and perhaps the need to start thinking about it now rather than when it might be too late to be able to reskill or react to what's coming.
So I think the frustration for me is I can see this quite clearly, right? I've seen it for years and years and years. And what I've seen is coming to fruition. And it's like the sky's falling and the sky's falling. So don't look up film, like the meteors come in and people's just ignoring them. And it feels like that. And people have got the livelihoods on it and they've got the house mortgage to pay and all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking, but you can mitigate this at the moment by making some sensible decisions now through training and through other things. You can make some sensible decisions that might get you into that variance analyst space, and you'll be a rare breed right at the start of when that wave's coming. And rather than getting knocked out by the wave, you surf it, right? And you have a phenomenal career. And I can see it so clearly. People saying, yeah, but Martin, that's not going to happen. And it's like, right, okay, right. That's a risk. There's a risk this is going to kill your career, and there's a risk that it won't. So what are you going to do to mitigate that risk? And they'll say, I'm going to ignore it. It's like, but you're a risk manager. Why would you ignore it? Why don't you invest a bit of your time and effort, get upskilled, and then you're educated then. So when the market starts to change, you know which way to go rather than being blind to it. And that training is free. So why would you do it? And they say, well, I'm too busy. It's like, oh, really? You know, this is an existential threat to your profession and your livelihood and all that. I don't understand it, Andy. I don't understand it.
Yeah. So it'll be useful for, well, actually, can we have the link to the book again put into the chat? Because I think some people may have joined just slightly after when it was put into the chat window before. But I think when people are going through, it'll be interesting to see, obviously, the first bit about that précis, what's the current state of things, what are the issues, what are these new ways we can do things across those three horizons, and these points of further discussions, I think are really useful. And it'd be great to get feedback in terms of a possible second iteration on the book on those, in particular on those points of further discussions and the role of the risk manager. And Martin, you said you've got some other books in mind, and it's going to follow the similar sort of format. And I suspect it will be a similar sort of point of further discussion for some other specialist roles on projects. Right, we've got about 10 minutes left. Realize that Martin and I have done all the talking so far. So we've got time to open up to some questions from the chat, or even we could, is it possible to unmute some people as well and get them to ask their question in person rather than?
So Evan, could you take the mute off? Is it possible to do that?
Yeah, 1 second.
Thank you.
Right, so I think I did see a hand go up before, but it looks like it's been put back down again. So who would like to kick off with a question for Martin in relation to his risk book?
So can people raise hands? Because they're probably clicking away. So I think Erin's just trying to take the locks off, because this is not so it's a webinar setting through Teams. It's not a Teams meeting. It's a webinar setting.
Here we go. We've got a hand. So Patrick, you're up first. So if we can, you can come off mute. Well done, Patrick. Let's hear your question.
Just confirm you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, so a lot of what you've talked around in terms of collecting the data is very much from the objective view, which is where you've got hard data for duration, costs. But really, I'm interested as to how we think AI is going to capture the more subjective data, the project management decisions, why decisions were made in the way that they were, because that's the fundamental thing about delivering a unique project, is that it's being delivered by a human being who has made decisions. If we go back to our weather analogy that we were talking about before, we said, okay, well, we've allowed a certain amount of time for weather. The risk is that it's weather in excess of what we planned for. Outside of the norms, we've made probabilistic decisions based on what we need. We've put in the right equipment. We've put in all the dewatering equipment. So how do we collect the more subjective data?
So we can do that by just sort of scraping all of your emails, all the Teams messages, and collating all of that and using sense making tools. So we can do that today, sentiment analysis, all that sort of stuff. If we start to document this in the right way as well, Patrick. So what we can do is we can say, right, there was a variance event. So we made a decision that led to a variance event. So let's just take a photograph, a snapshot of what that sort of environment looked like at the time. And that might be a snapshot of the schedule, the resourcing plan, your contingency, the weather forecast, all that sort of stuff. If you got it wrong, then is that because you made the wrong decision or because it didn't pan out that way, right? So we can now start to use the tools to help us with that, which takes account of all of these other factors. But it's really hard to do that with small data sets. And that's why we all need to collaborate, because we need the volumes of data so we can pull those features out, all those soft features you're talking about. And what we can also do, so I was talking to a chap called Kelvin McGrath last night, and Kelvin is from Australia. I think Andy's done some podcasts with him in the past. He's from Australia, flown over for the PMO conference and for various other meetings. And he's got a tool called Meeting Quality. And what Meeting Quality does is it looks at all these soft factors, right? It looks at, so you're starting to burn your team out. Is there a disconnect between what the boss thinks the project's going to sort of outturn at versus the people who's probably in project controls? And if you get a bigger and bigger variance on that, it probably means you've got a very gung-ho project manager and you've got a team who's saying, you're not listening to me, right? So we can pull all of those softer factors out through some of these AI tools that people like Kelvin's producing. We can feed that back into the process, and that says, are we ignoring what the truth teller is? We're just railroading it through. So I think it's not just about the picture of time, cost, and performance, the sort of standard things we use. It's now picking up all of these other factors that we can use artificial intelligence data analytics to sample for us. And the way Kelvin does it is just impulse surveys, right? So a 45-second survey, asks you a few questions and you feed back on it. And it keeps putting these different surveys out, these little samples, sense making, and that just gives a rich picture of what's going on with some of the softer human factors. And we can use that then, so we're learning for next time and learning for next time. We'll never get into a situation where we can predict exactly what the future is going to be looking like, because projects are too emergent, they're too multi-factor, etc. But it's about getting better at preempting some of it, so possible futures like.
Yeah, and I think Patch is a great question. So I think certainly if you look at the jigsaw lid, as Martin called it, across the three horizons, I think the horizon one is dominated by what you would call the hard factors, you know, cost and time and schedule and so on. And if you look at some of the things in Horizon 3, you get more into these more social factors and behavioural aspects, and the world of sentiment analysis. We're only just starting to understand how that's can be applied well in projects, and it certainly will lead into that sort of variance analytics piece in terms of if you've got a run rate of your perception of the project and there's a sudden change, it should prompt the question, why is it suddenly changed? And then you can then do something with it. So you get these early warning indicators, which is a part of the risk management toolkit. I think we can be using a lot of those around the, as you say, the softer side of things.
I think as well, what's really important, Andy, is your variance analyst role is not just to deliver that project. What your variance analyst is going to be doing is to curate your data. So you've got a learning organization. So when you go through some projects in the future, you can leverage all of that organizational experience. So it's got to be curated in the right way so you can pick it up and do something with it. If it just sits in a massive dustbin on SharePoint somewhere, it's going to be really hard to pick the bones out of it. So I think that will be part of a variance analyst role as well.
Yeah. I mean, in a prior role, I used to do lots of audits and assurance reviews, and particularly for business change projects, one of the first things I would look at is, can I have the last 4 or 5 minutes of the last 4 or 5 project board or steering group meetings, and I'm trying to see how many times has the project executive or the SRO missed a meeting. And 3 in a row usually is there's something really stinky about this project, and that's just a personal thing. Now that might be borne out in a whole load of data, at some point in time, that we could actually put a threshold or a sort of a more precise number on that, rather than me just saying my personal experience is 3 meetings in a row. Look further, dig deeper. Right. Anyone else got a question for Martin on his book? We are running towards the end of our
It's an opportunity to ask me anything you want about risk management and what the future looks like. Don't be shy. You're amongst friends here. So anybody disagree with what I've said? Is this all just navel gazing and people disagree with it? Because I'm very happy to have a debate.
We need to read your book in more detail and come back. Nameen, please, if you can come off mute and ask your question.
Hello. So I mean, I'm supporting everything that is in your book. I'm interested in, so if we kind of look at the railway, for example, and we're trying to make driverless trains, everyone's up in arms and the whole system falls apart. Do you see that happening in project delivery where we get unions and pushback and strikes and that kind of thing?
So great question, Naveen, right? I don't think this is about project delivery. I think it's about the future of human society, right? Are we all going to be sat at home and the robots are going to do everything? Or are we going to have some meaningful existence through work, right? And there's a lot of people who's working on that. They're talking about, you know, we all get a standard state income. We're going to start to tax some of these bots because it'll fund a future benefits pool, etc. I think it's a really challenging question to answer. But one thing's for certain is that is a very likely future is we're going to chip away at a lot of jobs, but new jobs will emerge. So I personally think that risk management will disappear as we know it today. And we're going to have a new thing, which is variance analytics. It's going to be a cooler job, much better job. I think it's going to be a better paid job as well, especially if you're really good at it. So if you can preempt where that variance is going to come from and to put the fires out as an ember instead of a towering inferno, it'll be worth a lot of money, right? And I think that is where some of the consultancies as well won't be working on the basis of putting risk managers in bums on seats. It's the organisations with the superpowers to preempt where things are going to go pear-shaped and to sort of maximize this process. So if you look forward and you're preempting all these scenarios, you're making better decisions a lot earlier. So back to your question, will there be riots and strikes and stuff? I think sooner or later there will be, because this is going to, you know, it's just going to change people's way of life.
Yeah, and it's happening in different sectors like the music industry and others. You know, and I don't think we would have foreseen a couple of years ago that it would been the creative industries that would come under attack first. We all thought it was going to be more automated type of work that would suffer. The World Economic Forum has got a report. I think it's called the Future of Work or something like that. It's worth a read because it does pose those things, and it is sort of leaning towards potentially that sort of universal income type model, or a 4-day week would be perhaps the horizon one step towards it. Right, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to share my screen again, and if we could have a repeat of the poll that we did at the beginning. So I guess, well, right on topic in terms of the discussion we've just been having. Will risk management as we know it today still exist in 2027? So not that far out. So what's the views? I think we had 2 people that were trigger happy earlier and answered the question before the debate, but that's fine. But let's get your views. They're coming in.
That's quite a spread, Andy.
Real spread. So we mostly have projects, professionals, project managers of different ilks on the call. I think we only had a couple of risk managers. It'd be interesting if the risk managers are still on the call, if they want to come off mute and share their thoughts, because I guess you've got more skin in the game on this question than the others.
I think that's fascinating. And I think for me, what's really important here as well is if we start to think about this, it's not going to be driven by the risk managers, it's going to be driven by the clients. So through the Infrastructure Projects Authority, for instance, if they are mandating that everybody's got to do risk process, so the risk managers are going to exist forever. If they drive that change and they start to promote a new way of working, then that'll accelerate the change. And that's the thing about the coalition, is client dread, so it's got the clients who's going to shape this thinking. And it's not just government clients, it's got industry clients as well.
Yeah.
So if we can get that client adoption going, that will drive what we're saying about this.
Well, I'm just so glad this wasn't my £1 million question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And this was I went for Ask the Audience rather than Ask the Expert. So great. Well, thank you very much, everyone who's attended today. As people who know me know that I like to start webinars on time and finish them on time, since we're part of the project profession that cares about time. So I'm going to call it a wrap here. Thank you, Martin, for taking time out and writing the book.
Thank you, Andy.
And asking me to help with the editing of it. I learned so much. I found it fascinating, and I hope everyone who has got the link, download a copy and enjoy it too. So thank you for attending, and hopefully see some of you soon.
Okay, thank you all.